Hello, everyone. Today, a military theorist is going to join us for this exclusive interview, General Iran Ortal. He served in the Israeli army, and he has insights about the decisive war, operational art, and the momentum plan. And his views are right now more prominent because of this war that the region is witnessing between Iran and Israel. General, thank you for being with us. Let's dive in the first question. You have long advocated for a decisive war approach in your work, including your book, The Battle Before the War. Does the current Israeli campaign and war against Iran targeting the nuclear facilities and military infrastructure align with your vision of a truly decisive approach, or does it risk becoming another war or campaign between wars that merely postpones the inevitable?
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon. We are in an historical climax for sure, in the prolonged historical battle that Iran has launched upon Israel via proxies and via many other things. Now, as you refer to the idea of decisive battlefield victory in the Israeli military thinking, we must remember that it was never about being strategically victorious. So Israel's strategic thinking and defense strategy was always about defeating the military force, and that's it. Israel, which is now with the great operational success in the Iranian skies, is more than ever perceived to be a regional power, was never really, and never will be, I guess, a real superpower. This is a 10 million people nation that is currently has gone to war unprecedentedly with almost 90 million people nation, 1,500 kilometers away from Israel, and another 1,000 kilometers in Iranian skies sometimes. Israel, as a Jewish nation, has never really influenced the politics surrounding it. So, both because of the dimension and both because of the nature of a Jewish state in the middle of the Arab and Islamic Middle East, operational victory is not about influencing the strategic thinking of the other side. It was always about removing a threat. So coming back to your question about the idea, the notion of operational decisive victory, the victory was always about just removing the immediate threat and surviving to have another few years, maybe a decade of calmness, so we can go on and build our nation and bring on more aliyah.
But why do you think this is happening now? You mentioned removing the threat, right? But right now in US media, we're seeing clips being repeated on social media, on other outlets, with the warning from Netanyahu since 1992, him saying that we are a few weeks or a few months away from a nuclear threat, and that we need to remove the threat, as he mentioned. But that's been, done for years and years. Some would say, what is the difference now? Because Iran does not have a nuclear weapon.
So the Israeli government and the IDF spokesman clearly say that this operation had to be done in this timing because the Iranians were in the middle of their so-called breakthrough to nuclear weapon. It has been published that the Iranians have enough nuclear substance to make those weapons. And naturally, after almost 20 months of war, after taking out Hezbollah, the main proxy of Iran, that was the main deterrence against Israel. And some other thing that also happened in this war, the timing was such that this operation could not be held on any further. You're right, it was prepared for more than a decade, but the timing right now, with Iranian breaking through a nuclear facility, with Hezbollah taking out of the equation, and with actually the strategic air defenses of the Iranians taking out back in October in the retaliatory strike of the IDF against Iran back in October, conditions were such that this operation had to go right now.
When you say breakthrough, to what extent this contradicts what Tulsi Gabbard, the head of intelligence, said, that the United States intelligence say that Iran is not close to creating a nuclear weapon?
Well, it will not be the first time the intelligence organizations of the United States, Israel, and other Western countries disagree about the exact position of the Iranian nuclear program. And then again, I also read this morning that some of the President Trump advisors also told him that they might not know in time as the Iranians make this breakthrough. So again, the conditions, the operational and strategic conditions were such, and you might even say just the fear of a possible breakthrough. All of this came together to make this moment, an obligation and an operational opportunity that can't be passed on.
You have critically assessed the IDF's need for change and innovation. How does the current operation strategy in Iran, particularly the ability to achieve air superiority over its skies, reflect the advancements envisioned by the Momentum Plan? And as you mentioned, is this a capability that Israel can realistically do that again in the future if Iran adapts?
So you've nailed it, John, with your question. This operation might be, historically, it will be remembered as one of the fantastic operations ever conducted in these conditions, in this a long ranges problem and a small nation against a great one. And it highlights you that the IDF is really an excellent force if you take the air components, the Kalastran air components, the Mossad operations embedded and combined into the Air Force, and of course the Supreme Intelligence. The fact that the war has now been going on for 20 months also highlights some of the weaknesses of the IDF. The fact that we were not able to take Gaza and clear it in a faster manner. We could not have had simultaneous offensives against Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And although all the campaigns were quite successful, the fact that this war is going on for 20 months is in a huge contrast to Israel's defense strategy, which is all about decisive operational victories, as I said, in order to shorten the wars, because small nations do not enjoy long wars. So that's the main principle. And here's where some of the ideas of transformation and modernization, especially to the ground forces, comes into the conversation.
Your insights suggest Iran's proxy strategy is currently a total failure. However, you warned that this is not the end of things and that Iran will seek revenge through harassing oil flow, supporting Houthis, and potential terror acts. How does Israel prepare for this anticipated revenge phase, especially if the current military operation does not finish the nuclear program completely this time or achieve a diplomatic surrender?
So again, a very good question that highlights the fact that Israel can have its tactical and even operational level victories. It can defeat the Iranian military effort for now, but it cannot defeat Iran. And as we know, this adversary, it will seek the revenge. And the Iranian way is to revenge through proxies, through the blocking of free trade in the maritime routes, and of course international terrorism. And you know, Israel is on the guard for those scenarios, but it just highlights the fact that this war is not an Israeli war per se. The Israelis fight it, but Iran, only way to really make itself relevant again is to threat, and it does it openly, its neighbors, its Arab neighbors in the region and the maritime flow of energy, as you've pointed out. And let me also highlight, if I may, another aspect. Because, you know, as we speak, the United States is measuring its own steps. And I think that your viewers need to realize that this war is not only a regional war. Russia, China are looking on what's happening. The states of the Arab Gulf and some more are also looking looking to see whether the local bully is being taken care of by the free world. So this is a test for all of us as a community, not just the Israeli side. Of course, the Israeli side needs to take out the immediate concrete threats posed to Israel.
You mentioned this war is also, we have Russia and China are looking, as you mentioned. Earlier today, Russia and the Kremlin released a statement saying or warning the United States of helping or being involved in this war against Iran. What does that mean?
Well, frankly, I'm not a Russian expert, but I've been listening to the Russian, voices for the last 3 years, and we've heard threats of the use of the use of nuclear weapons in the context of the Ukrainian war, and we've actually seen quite incompetence by the Russian side in the Ukrainian war and in the Syria affair. So, and I haven't heard a specific threat by Russia, but some diplomatic hard words.
But what does that mean? Since I remember doing an interview with former National Security Advisor for former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Eyal Hulata, and Mr. Hulata said that he played a huge role in the Ukraine-Russian conflict, specifically in negotiations, right? Because they maintained that relationship with the two countries, which is something that we cannot say about so many other countries. Today, with this threat, is this threat considered a threat against the United States or against the war that Israel is launching against the Iranian regime?
So again, you're right. Israel was involved in the beginning of the Ukrainian war in some negotiations that went sour, did not succeed. At this point, the Russian hold in the region is severely compromised because of the regime change in Syria. And if you look at the dynamics between Iran and Russia, Iran used to be a Russian client. Now it's sort of the other way around. It's the Iranians that are pushing war material to Russia. And really, there's, if you look at the details, you can't imagine any serious help provided by Russia to the Iranians. And I don't think the Russian or the Chinese or anyone else will go to war with the United States over Iran. I mean, that's really just empty words. So at the end of the day, all this axis of evil is left with is harsh words.
Based on the comparative analysis that we're seeing lately on the news with political pundits of Iraq and Iran's resource-cursed experiences, what is your assessment of the likelihood of a regime change in Iran as a direct consequence of this war? If the regime were to fall suddenly, what kind of country or shape do you foresee Iran taking? And how can the international community and Israel prevent it from devolving into the kind of chaos seen in post-2003 Iraq or Libya?
Well, frankly, this is not a question. This is not a very good question to ask me. I'm a military analyst, not an Iranian expert. But saying that, one needs to look back to history and why Libya, Iraq were never a very coherent nation state. The Persian Empire has a long history behind it, and it has been cohesive for many, many decades. So I imagine, and I know there are a lot of minorities in Iran, but my assessment is that Iran and nation's cohesiveness will maintain. Who will rule Iran? It's a good question. But the main thing is that we do not control and we do not really have any influence about the Iranian people's will to fight this oppressive regime. All that Israel can do is remove some of the threats immediately pointed out here. The rest is up to the population. And the regime's failures is not on our hand.
From a military strategic point, we live with consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even from a military standpoint, we know for a fact that any military operation has its consequences. In Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan, when these wars or conflicts happened, the population had to face the consequences of those wars even after the American troops left, whether in Iraq or Afghanistan. The heaviness of the consequences were, shadowed by the people and on the people. Aren't you afraid that this would create more chaos in the region, with more countries living the uncertainty of what's going to happen after a military operation?
So you're right. Consequences can go either way. From an Israeli point of view, and I truly believe from a Western and regional point of view, in the worst case scenario, if you have to wait the risks of a regime really controlling this huge nation with its huge resources, having all of this nation's resources being invested in this vicious axis of terrorism from Lebanon, which has deteriorated in the last decade under Hezbollah's control dramatically, and Yemen, where the Houthis has taken control and now rule the Bab el-Mandab, and the fear of the Saudi Arabias and all other Gulf states, and the fear in Jordan from Iranian involvement trying to overthrow the king. If you take all that into consideration, and you see the situation within Iraq with the Iranian influence heavily embedded in Iraq, you see all these mayhems caused by this very effective regime, and you weigh that against the risk of internal mayhem in Iran. Well, from a non-domestic Iranian point of view, the internal overthrow, of course, of this regime, I think, will be a better scenario for all of us.
Which means like a major concern following any significant upheaval is regional stability. So we can agree to that. Do you believe there is a risk of contagion or destabilization in other resource-rich, often fragile states in broader region? Like specifically to address a direct public concern, do you see a country like Pakistan, for instance, as a potentially being next to face similar internal or external pressures that could lead to disarray?
So, it's sort of a paradox. You're asking me about the risk of regional instability, where regional instability was caused by a deliberate strategy, decades-long deliberate strategy of the Iranians. Instability was their weapon against all of us. And yes, sometimes, sadly, in history, one has to escalate the situation in order to regain stability. This is where we are right now. I think the point is that if you de-escalate too soon, you might end up with the escalation behind you and not better stability in front of you. Now, regarding Pakistan, Pakistan is in decades-long internal instability and a cause of regional instability, but that's way beyond Israel's scope. It's not directed at us, and it has nothing to do with Israel's foreign or defense policy right now at all.
Regarding the logistical challenges, you mentioned the significant hurdles of overflight permissions from Jordan, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. How does Israel overcome these impossible flight routes and ensure sustained operational reach into Iranian territory without explicit U.S. air support? What alternative operational concepts are considered for future engagements?
We can't get around geography. And geography-wise, if Israel is to regain operations one time in the future in Iran, the nations you have outlined will be part of the corridor one way or another, whether Jordan or Syria, surely Iraq, and we will have to figure it out. But it also highlights the magnitude of the moment that we speak in, because this is not an operation that will be very easy to repeat. So if this operation finally ends up and the Iranians escape the total destruction of their nuclear and missile program and kind of be left alone to recover themselves, well, we will be in a strategically bad position. Although the operational side of the operation is a huge success strategically, we will be in a bad spot. That should be avoided.
You touched upon the current situation of Israelis being stuck over the world and awaiting extraction flights, including your own experience in Boston. From a military planning and civil defense perspective, what are the critical lessons learned from these mass civilian logistical challenges, and how should Israel integrate this into its future defense strategy and preparedness?
We're doing it right now. The lessons learned are being implemented right now. Naturally, civilian airlines and Israeli civilians can't be notified ahead for this kind of an operation. So the situation is as it is. There are 158,000 Israelis stuck outside of the country. As you said, I'm one of them. But there is an air train being planned and actually executed from last night through Israel. Israeli airlines go in the closed Israeli airspace with special coordination with the Air Force and special protection around them. So they kind of sneak to the airport a few planes at a time, so it takes time. All Israelis sign up for these flights. I'm waiting for my email to say that my flight is approved. and vessels are going out of Cyprus to bring some more Israeli citizens in via the Mediterranean. And if that's the cost of war, well, we're in a good spot that way.
You mentioned a huge difference between Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Iranians in terms of reaching and achieving air superiority. Could you elaborate on the specific challenges and capabilities required for strikes deep within Iran that differentiates the whole thing significantly from operations against proxies like Hezbollah?
First, there's the distance. While Lebanon is on Israel's border, Iran is 1,500 kilometers away. And as I said, Iranian targets might be 2,200 kilometers away. The IDF was never and will never be an expeditionary force. Fighting at those distances is a huge challenge. Now, and that's before I mention what the Americans would call A2ADs, which is basically the fact that anti-aircraft and surface-to-surface missiles do have the upper hand at this particular moment in history. So whenever the American and Western militaries think about the problem of future warfare, and a huge part of it will be how to overcome those precision defenses. What the IDF has done in Iran is quite unique. It was a combination of what we've seen in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian war, the Spider operation against the Russian bombers, with special ops conducted with drones inside Russia. So that was done in huge scales in the Iranian territory by Mossad operatives, but that was done in a very close combination with the Air Force strikes. So you have there this kind of a very well coordinated spatial operation on huge magnitude, puncturing the A2AD, the defense's bubble, from within and from without, with a very good coordination. And that is actually a firstly presented way of warfighting in our age.
Also, you've raised concerns that Iran's bank of targets will not be replenished at the same rate in light of information security lessons the enemy is now learning. How does the IDF plan to maintain a strategic advantage against an adapting and recovering Iranian military in a sustained war?
Basically, this war is not to be sustained. The strategic aim of the IDF and Israel is not to have a prolonged war over Iran, and that is stated openly by our senior commanders and by our political leaders. Israel is not to sustain a prolonged operation over Iran. As the IDF spokesman said, we have some 1 or 2 weeks work to do there, and I will assume some of the logic of keeping more targets for the next 1 or 2 weeks has political logic, not only operational logic. So operation will continue until we can find out what will be the American and Western approach towards Iran, and whether negotiations or further more efficient strikes by American assets will also go into this operation. And so the logic is to further the destruction of Iranians' capabilities. Now they're going into missile facilities, missile factories, anti-tank missile factories this morning, and so on. So recovery of those capabilities will take more time for the Iranians, and part of the logic is to wait for the American decision.
You wrote also a piece that the current strategy striving to shorten the long war we have fallen into. In the context of the direct confrontation with Iran, what is the realistic timeline of this war? And what are the specific criteria of what you mentioned as a shortened, successful outcome from a military perspective?
So from a military perspective, two major aspects have prolonged this war. Three. The first one would have is the very hard terrain and mainly the subterranean aspect of the fighting in Gaza. The second point was the fact that we were in a fight with Hezbollah in the north, and we couldn't have two offensives simultaneously in the south and the north. And the last aspect was the Iranian support of both Hamas and Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah was taken out of the war last October and November 24. And that should have been shorter, but that's behind us now. And Hamas is now on the verge of losing its population, which is the one thing that supports Hamas's operations. So in Gaza, I will analyze that we are approaching the end. And finally, with Iranian support, or the even hope for an Iranian support being lost, both in Lebanon and Hamas, I think we are in a very good spot that allows us to hope that this war is close to its end, finally.
And with Iran now directly retaliating with ballistic missiles, how does Israel calibrate its strikes to avoid an uncontrolled escalation into a full-scale regional conflagration while still aiming for decisive military outcomes against Iran's core capabilities, while we're also seeing some media reports that are civilians being, among the casualties?
Civilians are among the casualties. Israeli civilians are being directed purposely by the Iranians. We have some shrapnels fallen near my home with my family in Israel just this morning. So it is a hazardous situation. Now, talking about a regional all-out war being escalating from this crisis, I don't know where escalation can go further. We are at the height of this escalation. No restraints by the Iranians, directing their missiles on our civilians, on our city centers. Very little restraints by Israel, which does not direct its operation against civilians, but strikes at will at all other targets over Iran. And the only escalation I can further think of is Iran directing some of its missiles to block the Hormuz Straits or strike some targets in Saudi Arabia in the Gulf states, as it is threatened to do in the past, or some American bases. But basically what we can see in the last 3 days is that the firepower of Iran has diminished dramatically. Many of its launchers were hit, and what was supposed to be 300 and 400 missiles, salvos, shot at Israel, simultaneously, ended up to be, these days, 8, 10, 12 missile salvos. So if Iran splits its remaining firepower between all these regional targets, I don't think that will be much of an escalation. That will actually be a disperse of their efforts.
The paradox of plenty report highlights Iran's dependence on oil revenues and its consumption-driven economy. How might sustained military pressure and sanctions exacerbate these internal economic fragilities to the point of impacting the regime stability, or its popular support for continued conflict?
Iran has been under sanctions and for many years under very severe sanctions up to this point. That did not change the regime's priorities, and with their very tough grasp over the population, that did not change the population capability or will to go out and effectively resist the regime. So sanctions might help and are helpful with denying resources from the Iranians to do what they do. But sanctions or air power do not change political will. We must realize that. That's why we have to consider the adversary's capabilities, and when the time comes, take them out of the equation.
If the current conflict ends without fully dismantling Iran's nuclear program or its regional influence, how does Israel prevent this war from simply becoming a prelude to the next war, as you described concerning Lebanon, and what specific military or strategic steps are needed to break this cycle?
History doesn't end. If this regime is allowed to not only hold its power, but rearm and recover its capabilities, we will be at war again someday in the future, hopefully a long time from now as possible. But Israel alone cannot promise, with its limited military effort, to prevent a future war. We will surely do our best efforts to be as successful in that future war as we are right now, and surely even more successful, because as I said, this war has gone on for too long, and at the end of the day, we can't take all right now. We are not in a position of diminishing all Iranian nuclear capabilities by ourselves.
I'd like to end with a strategic game or questions I ask with my guests or experts. I will mention a topic or a name, and I would like to see what is the first thing, word, or sentence that come to your mind. Let's start with oil prices.
Big on American mind, not so big on Israeli mind, not such a great consideration for us.
Technology of warfare, big on Israeli mind?
Very big on Israeli mind, and as you can see, our Air Force and intelligence are huge in that field. We should take this modernization also into our ground forces capabilities, so we can hasten and be as brilliant with our ground operations as we are over the Iranian sky.
Will the regime fall?
I really don't know. It's on the Iranian hands, not on us.
Message to Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia.
Hang on in there. We're taking those bullies out.
Should Saudi Arabia take a leadership role in solving the Gaza issue after the war?
Well, what's solving the Gaza situation? I don't know. Whether the Saudis should be a leading force with the reconstruction of the demilitarized Gaza Strip, absolutely.
Mohammed bin Zayed, UAE.
As I know, really effective and an effective leader. You know, maneuvering its small nation between those giant threats and having some good impact on the region.
Jordan.
Oh, it's been falling for the last almost 100 years and still is there. And so I'm sure this nation will continue to exist under the throne. And hopefully, as we get the region stabilized, Jordan will be able even to thrive, not just to survive.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
What about Benjamin Netanyahu?
One word, one sentence that comes to your mind.
Well, I wish our politics were not as polarized and base-oriented as they are right now.
Young Arabs or the youth of the Arab world.
I really hope a new Arab generation will grow up with hope for better future based on education, on welfare, on good economy, and not on ideology of faith.
The new leadership in Syria.
That's a great question. Hopefully, they will not end up a Turkish proxy. Hopefully, there will be a Syrian patriot.
Iraq.
Hopefully, with a diminishing Iranian influence, Iraq will find its way to flourish. It has all the resources needed to do that.
China.
I hope this war, sadly we needed this war, but this war will prove for our neighbors that the Chinese are not the correct global power to mitigate dangers in our region.
Strait of Hormuz.
With the Iranian threat out of the way, hopefully, I hope the Straits of Hormuz will not be threatened again.
Any final thought, something I didn't say, but you thought that I should?
Well, I think you've covered things, and thank you for that.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you for watching.